Good afternoon, everyone. Andy Jacob here with the DotCom Magazine Entrepreneur Spotlight Series. What a show today. We've been able to book the person that I'm calling the educator's educator. He is really an unbelievable expert in professional development. He's presented at numerous conferences. He's even presented at the White House. We've been able to book Dr. Jay Eitner, the CEO of Eitner Education, on the show today. This is going to be a great show. Buckle up because we're going to learn all about it from Dr. Eitner today. Jay, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Eitner, this is an amazing opportunity to have you on the show. I've got so many questions about what you do, but we always like to start the show, as you know, by pulling the lens back to 30,000 feet and tell us all about Eitner Education.
Sure. Eitner Education was founded out of a necessity for meaningful, productive professional development. Just a little bit about me. I've been in education for 20 years, starting out as, I taught for a decade. I was an assistant principal, a K-12 supervisor. I became a superintendent of schools when I was 34. And through that whole process, professional development is really critical for staff to grow, learn, and move onward. And unfortunately, I was finding in a myriad of roles that I had that the professional development being offered wasn't necessarily the professional development that was needed. So in turn, Eitner Education was founded, and we serve the entire United States. We did some stuff in Canada. We did some stuff overseas, believe it or not. And we're here as a service for all private public school districts, and we cover a lot of other things as well.
That's unbelievable, Jay. So let's talk about it, because when people think about the public schools or the private schools, one thing that doesn't come to mind for just an average person is how much continuing education and how much additional education those people really need, and how much they like to have, and how much they do during the year. So let's talk about it a little bit. So a school district will reach out to Eitner Education and they'll say, Dr. Eitner, we need some additional workshops for the staff, or we want to develop a long-term master plan for our staff. Let's talk about what that conversation sounds like.
Sure. Well, it varies by state, but every single state has a requirement that teachers need some kind of professional development or professional education to continue their practice. That being said, it is often the district that decides what that professional development is. And in some cases, it's very specific. In other cases, it's very general, very broad. But in most situations, when I'm contacted, it's for a specific reason or a specific purpose. So my niche generally is with boards of education and superintendent relations. A lot of times, central administration, but anything can be tailored to what the district needs. So unfortunately, with COVID, it's a lot of COVID planning, post-COVID education. What are we doing now to get back into the classrooms and stay there? So there was a lot of, workshops on hybrid education, technology deployment, all these things that really people outside of education, they don't think about. The bottom line is that education is a business. It's a people business, and we have to give the people what they want. And in this case, again, we really tailor to what the district is asking for, and hopefully we fulfill those staff needs.
Jay, that's really interesting. And let's talk a little bit about it, since you spoke about it briefly just a moment ago, about this idea of a hybrid education. Do you see this hybrid education sort of becoming more of a mainstream type of an educational opportunity? Or is it something that that when COVID's over, that the hybrid education will also be over when that's over?
That's a great question. So I think it's twofold. Before all COVID happened, there were districts that were definitely dabbing their toe in the water, specifically with snow days. So they were, most superintendents would put 3 days of snow into the calendar. We work them off as accordingly. But some other districts where snow is all the time, like I know a couple colleagues in Illinois, in Chicagoland, snow is, you can get it twice a week for 4 or 5 months. So they were playing with the concept of having remote learning days during snow. Now, most of the country didn't have any type of plan and process. And we went from 0 to 100 in about 10 days. And it was kind of like learning as we go versus learning before we go. Now that we know how it works, and now that we know the positives and the pitfalls, there very well could be a chance of hybrid education in the future. But let me be clear, nothing replaces that in-person student instruction where students are having that interaction with the staff, but most importantly, students are interacting with other students. One of the biggest pitfalls of COVID is that these students, mental health awareness and mental health services have increased sometimes 30 to 40% in some districts because the amount of stress that is put upon a student, the amount of non-social interaction, same thing with staff members. And one of those things that we've identified as a solution is to bring everybody back. Will that happen tomorrow? Will that happen in a week or a month? We still don't know, because right now, as we're taping this, COVID is changing by the day, and which means schools and school professional development changes by the day based upon what the current government guidance is or whatever the virus is. And we have to really be cognizant of that as we move forward. So to answer your question in a very long-winded way, yeah, I think there's going to be hybrid learning in the future. I don't know if it's going to be as frequent as it is now.
Jay, that's very interesting. And for some people, unfortunately, it took something like COVID to help them understand and realize the importance of learning and the importance of education and the importance of getting the kids to the school and the importance of the teachers and the importance of the administrators and the importance of the entire fabric of the educational community. So when we think about this mental stress that you mentioned that has been going on with these children and the staff and the teachers and the administrators themselves, we see so many components of this stress sort of showing their ugly head in terms of, advanced suicide rates and problems with younger people and things like that. So maybe you could touch on that and share with our audience, why it's so stressful and why it's so important to get the kids back to school, like you mentioned.
Sure. Well, again, social interaction is a part of the school process, public, private, regardless of zip code or where you live. That interaction is absolutely crucial for a student to grow. I used to say when I was a superintendent, look, we could teach like we're preparing kids for Jeopardy and just, have them drill facts and spit off, facts over their head. But now we don't need to do that. We have a cell phone at hand that has the internet with a matter of clicks. And, you really have to focus on the whole child. And you have to focus on the whole learner. And part of that is just socialization and learning how to get along, learning how to resolve conflict. And you really can't get that experience, in a Zoom box with 20 other kids. Now, I've seen some kids, slack off and look, kids are going to be kids and they're going to do goofy things and they're going to get in trouble. Again, I don't care what age you are, what zip code you come from, kids are kids. So you still have that, a little bit of that interaction on Zoom, but clearly nothing to the level of an experience in the classroom. So again, bringing everybody back is so important just for that development of the whole child. I mean, I've seen some reports already saying that, the COVID years are going to have major impact on a child's education. Everything from state testing all the way down to functioning in society, which unfortunately I believe now, that all being said, now that there's a need now for COVID, reaffirmation and getting people back. So now this opens up a whole different level of professional development that's needed in school districts or in schools or by state. It's going to vary, but it's unfortunately now it's a major need. And how do we accomplish that? And that's where, Eitner Education or lots of other professional development folks come in.
That makes all the sense in the world. The school districts really do need to reach out to get some help. It's almost like a young entrepreneur getting a mentor. A school district really could bring in a consultant that helps them sort of put everything together in a meaningful way for the administration and the staff and the children and the students. And it makes all the sense in the world to bring an expert from the outside in to give you a different look and maybe a unique way to solve a problem, which is what you're known for, Dr. Eitner. Now, with Eitner Education, Jay, you do some other things as well, and we want to talk about that because you have a fascinating service offering, and you do some other things as well through the Eitner Education platform. So let's talk about some of the other things that you do as well.
Sure. The goal of Eitner Education is for everyone to grow, to learn, and move onward. So whether it's professional development, whether it's expert witness testimony, it could be, one of the latest offerings now from Eitner Ed is career guidance. So helping someone who wants to go into administration from soup to nuts. So resume building, interview coaching, feedback, LinkedIn, all these things that are so important now that, 6 years ago didn't really matter. The technology is just changing so much week after week. And 5 years from now, we're all going to be using a device that doesn't exist. And 30 years from now, our students are going to be doing jobs that don't exist, but they will be taking care of us. And we have an onus to take care of them at this point. So that all being said, Eitner Ed, again, offers a variety of services that really cater to superintendents, boards of education, parents in need of services, and again, educators in need of services. We really try to hit everybody.
That's awesome. I really love this moniker, the educator's educator. It makes a lot of sense to me. Jay, when we think about something that I said early on, people are probably wondering about the presentation you gave at the White House.
Yeah,
that's super interesting for people. So let's talk about that. What was it like to go to the White House and give a presentation? Maybe you could give some color and some insight onto that.
Sure. It has been an absolute honor to do it not only once, but do it twice. And just the sheer awe of being invited to go in and speak about technology infusion and 21st century learners, the White House. It's one of those things, regardless of who the president is, it's still the White House. It's a prestigious honor. So we got to go. I took a friend of mine the first time, and we lit it up. And we just said, look, this is what we're doing in our district. And what's cool about educators is that we all want to share. So school districts want to share with other school districts. We want to learn what the good stuff is. We want to learn the pitfalls as well. So when we went, we spoke about, primarily the technology infusion, what's working for students, staff, and schools and school districts, and what's not. Because like I said earlier, knowing the pitfalls and knowing what doesn't work is almost as important as knowing what does work. Because the last thing we want to do is generate more mistakes, which will cost money and time. So the first time we spoke about technology infusion. The second time I really got to dive into best practices insofar as technology and STEAM integration into school districts. And it was really cool because the chief technology officer of the White House was also in attendance. And you could see the amount of notes that she was taking, copious notes. So that people that were speaking and what we were talking about was being taken very seriously.
I love it, Jay. That's a great experience. You've been invited to go back twice. I'm sure a third invitation is right around the corner for you. When we think about education, Dr. Eitner, one thing that comes to mind from sort of the layman's perspective is, why is there a great disparity between certain school districts or certain schools with the number of kids that get better grades versus poor grades, the number of kids that end up going to college versus the number of kids that end up not going to college? What does it have to do with? Why is there a disparity in our school system with regard to sort of the performance of the students?
That, my friend, is the $64 million question that every educator from kindergarten teacher to commissioner of education has tried to figure out. A lot of it, unfortunately, it does depend on zip code. You look at socioeconomic background, you look at challenges of poverty, you look at challenges of learning disabilities and addressing those learning disabilities. We have seen historically in our country millions of dollars thrown to underserving districts, and we've seen data that shows that doesn't change anything. So even though we're spending a lot of money on education, as we should, it's not necessarily being reflective all around. And one of the things I'm most near and dear of is the fact I don't care about your zip code. I don't care about your background, if you're male, female, whatever skin color you are, whatever your credence is. Everybody deserves a fair education and everybody deserves the same opportunity. It's the question of how we actually deliver those opportunities and, getting the technology in place. We're very internet heavy at this point. So in 2 districts where I served, internet connections at home weren't there. So what do you do then? So, you have to provide internet services. So we actually hooked students up with not only the technology that they could take home, but we actually bought wireless hotspots that were sponsored by several different phone companies to give them the internet services that they provided. A lot of these services that the government offers, people don't know about and they don't hear about. And that's where another consultant firm comes in. Eitner Ed's very good at letting everybody know, hey, you could get internet, phone, and cable for 10 cents a month if you're on free and reduced lunch. Really? Yeah, really. Do they have to tell me that? No, they don't have to tell you. But here, I'm telling you, right? There's several organizations, nonprofits that will deliver technology like a laptop for $100 or, a Chromebook for $50. And the districts can buy them and then turnkey them to those who need it. Services, everything from free and reduced lunch all the way down to, distinctive technologies in classrooms. All of those things are needed in order to really balance out the child. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, we still don't have that consistency in 2021. It's still not a level playing field. But to the grave, I will fight every single day to make sure that those kids are getting what they need to grow, learn, and move onward.
Well, you're a wonderful leader in the field, and you're known somewhat as a zeitgeist and a futurist. So that leads me to my next question, Jay. When we think about the future of education, we're seeing the younger people now that have been faced with having to deal with sort of COVID for the last, 12, 18 months. And we don't know how much longer that's going to go on. God willing, it doesn't go on much further. But let's think about their children and their children's children for a minute, out into the future. Where does it go? What does, Dr. Eitner feel about the future of education and sort of where is it all moving to, if you know what I'm saying?
Sure. Well, again, I know I said earlier, our future is going into society at the unknown right now. For the past 12 to 15 months, things have really been upside down, and it changes every day. And I believe we're at the end of the tunnel, and we're getting out at this point and going to return to somewhat kind of a normalcy. But, there are lessons learned from this. And the biggest lesson learned is that, we can use technology in a meaningful and productive way. And a lot of districts saw technology as almost like a fad or, like an evil almost, and I think that's finally come full circle. So when families of students and their families go to school, are we still going to be in person? Absolutely. That's not going to change. Will we have the ability to flip at a switch to go hybrid or go distant for a week or whatever the case may be? Yes, we'll definitely have that. And we'll always have that because we're reflective of what COVID has done. So if there's any positive thing I could say that's come out of COVID is that school districts have learned how to successfully integrate technology into their programs so that students can keep learning to the best of their abilities.
Yeah, that makes all the sense in the world, Jay. That's a great synopsis. When I was growing up, we didn't have cell phones, obviously, and we were going to school and we were integrated with our classmates and we were going out on the playground and we were learning and no technology at all, really. But now there's so much technology for the kids. There's so much out there. Every kid seems to have a cell phone now, and we've got the 5G that's now taking over the country, and the speeds are increasing every single day. So for the parents watching the show, we have entrepreneurs that watch the show, but we have entrepreneurs who are also parents watching the show, a lot of them. And they might be saying to themselves, I'm not 100% sure what changes have taken place within the schools with all the kids having cell phones on them. But since I've got Dr. Eitner on the show today, I wanted to ask the question: what's happened with the educational sort of umbrella with all the kids now that have cell phones? Has it hurt it? Has it helped it? Is it somewhere in between? What's going on with the kids coming to school with all the cell phones?
Well, it's definitely, at first, it threw people off. It definitely, I remember when I was teaching, I had a kindergarten class where students had phones in their book bag, like an emergency phone, kind of, hit this button for mom, hit this button for dad. That would go off occasionally. I spent most of my time in 8th grade, and when the cell phones first started hitting, they would go off during class, and then it would get more progressive to the point where a lot of school districts turned it around and made it punitive. So, if your cell phone goes off, you got to turn it in, it goes to the office, you get suspended or something like that, and ironically, about 10 years before that, remember pagers and beepers? In New Jersey, they were actually illegal in schools because there was a correlation to beepers and drug dealing. So if you got caught with a pager, you got suspended for up to 2 weeks. That never, thankfully, moved forward with cell phones, but eventually it became such an influx where policies and regulations had to change insofar as dealing with, what do we do? And thankfully, the progressive educators around the land got together and said, hey, look, let's use this in some type of productive and positive way. And that didn't happen overnight. In fact, it took a couple years for people to really embrace what the cell phone can do. Can it be a distraction? Of course it could be a distraction. Are teachers going to let it be a distraction? That's really the question. And again, how could I use this piece of technology in the classroom right now to help students? I said it earlier, 5 years from now, we're going to be using an iWhatever or some type of tablet or futuristic device that hasn't been invented, but everyone's going to have. And the same issue is going to come up: is how are we going to use this widget in class so everyone can learn? How can we do it in a positive and productive way? We've done it with technology. We've done it with technology websites, right? Social media. It went from being, social media is so bad to, a lot of teachers have Twitter accounts now, and there's Instagram pages for student work. And there's all these other, I've seen a district use Snapchat to talk about their sports and their clubs. So embracing cell phones and all the technology that comes with it, because, we could run the world from our cell phone. You could turn the power off in your house, turn on an oven, check your kids, see cameras and what's going on. I mean, you could run the world, do your banking. It's a tool, and it's a tool that everyone is using at this point. And it has to be, thankfully, it's been embraced in a very positive way, and it's being integrated for a positive learning experience.
I love to hear that, and it sounds like you're one of the leaders leading the way to turn that into a positive, and that's really, really awesome. Teachers, I feel, are real heroes, not the real heroes, but real heroes. There's a number of real heroes out there. They're amazing when they're interacting with the children and they're teaching and educating. They go to work every day and they make positive impacts in as many young people's lives as they can. I mean, they just don't get, in my mind, enough credit, enough pay. They don't get enough of a lot of things because they're just amazing with what they do. And one thing that you mentioned, Jay, is that educators love to share. That's like what they're all about. They like to share things. They like to share things that are working. They like to share things that aren't working. How do educators share all this massive information that all of them have so that there's a meaningful communication between educators throughout the country? Do they have a way that they communicate, or do the districts more depend on people like you to come in and tell them what's working in other parts of the country?
Well, I could speak to social media again. It went from being this is bad to, wow, this is amazing. Specifically Twitter with educators. There are Twitter chats, there are Twitter channels, there are dedicated hashtags to learning. And the past decade with Twitter. I mean, you could say what you want about Twitter or politics, but Twitter and education is phenomenal. You know, I could go on and send a tweet out right now saying, hey, have you heard of X, Y, and Z? And you'll have teachers, administrators, board members, people will chime back and say, hey, this worked. Here's a link to what we've done. Or be careful, this didn't work, and here's why. And again, I like to hear both sides because, you know, you want to go in full rounded and know what's going on. There are Facebook groups. There's, you know, again, 600 apps. 600 apps come out a week on the App Store. And the amount of social media, there's so many different channels. You know, I could say there's Voxer, there's Telegram. The new one right now is Clubhouse. And look, there's going to be a new one in 3 weeks that everyone's going to flock to. But these social media platforms are a great place where people are actually sharing so much. And again, it's really appreciated because we had that culture where a classroom was like your kingdom and the door closed and that's it. And you didn't want to share your lessons and you didn't want to share your resources or materials. Now everyone's like, hey, go ahead, have at it. And, you know, there are websites dedicated, you know, there's a couple paid websites that you could go on and download curriculum or worksheets and all that kind of stuff. But again, the power of social media in a positive way in education has come leaps and bounds.
Well, Dr. Eitner, I love it. I love that we're turning technology into a positive. That's the real reason why we have technology. And if used correctly, it's a powerful tool that can bring a lot of light into the world. I know you've only cut out a certain amount of time for us today out of your busy schedule, Jay, but I want to end our interview the way we always do with our Entrepreneur Spotlight series. For the younger entrepreneurs watching the show, you've been able to build a very successful practice with Eitner Ed. And we love to have our successful entrepreneurs look into the camera and talk to the younger entrepreneurs and give them some advice or maybe give them some encouragement to be able to lean on when they face a tough challenge in their startup or in their business. And we'd love to give you that opportunity to talk to the younger entrepreneurs and give them a little of your, you know, Dr. Eitner wisdom, if you will, about being an entrepreneur.
Sure. So I'll look into the camera at this point, and the first thing I got to tell you is it will be okay. It is a very, very scary move to step out and start something on your own. I was absolutely, my knees were shaking for the first 2 months. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know how to run a business. I really, you know, I relied on my past experiences, which is probably why you are going into that field right now and why you are starting that business. It's okay. And you're going to make mistakes. And that's okay too, because we learn from when we fail. Now, that doesn't mean I want you to go out and fail at everything you do. That's not right. But those life lessons, if you will, you know, those mistakes that you're going to make, that's where you really learn. And that's where you grow, learn, and move onward. So you really, you know, you find your niche, you find what the need is, you identify that need, and you build yourself around that need. And look, there's needs for everything and anything, right? I found it to be education because I've been in the business for 20 years. I found that there was a niche for me where I could really fit in and provide services. You're doing the same thing. You're finding a niche where you could offer services. You know, try things out, talk to people. People are more than willing to share their stories. Look at the .com, okay? This whole entrepreneur series and the articles, people are more than happy to share what's worked and what hasn't worked. It's okay to ask, reach out. You could reach out on social media. You could reach out on LinkedIn. You could email these companies directly. People will be willing to help because they've been in that spot before. So don't be afraid. Go at it, and you're going to be successful. May not happen overnight, but it'll happen.
Jay, I love it. Wow, what a great thing for entrepreneurs to think about. Dr. Eitner, I wanted to thank you so much for slicing some time out today. I had so many questions about Eitner Ed, the way you're able to help professional development in so many different areas. Being the educator's educator, I love that so much. And what you're doing is really providing a powerful impact to the nation's children, to the nation's people that that need it, to the people that are the future of America. And thank you so much for coming on the show today, Jay. It's been an absolute delight.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it very much. And thank you for doing what you do.